Could the Hornets go after Dillon Brooks if the Grizzlies don't want him back under any circumstance? We'll then recap Steve Clifford's coaching performance this past season. And legend Howard Beck, he joins the Locked On Hornets podcast today.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free. We're available anywhere you get your pods. That does include YouTube. You can see Doug Branson right there. Find his work on his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. And you can listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. We are out at Quail Hollow this week, Doug. We're doing the Wells Fargo Championship. We're out there for 3 consecutive days doing remote shows. So it's going to be a grind. And it was hell trying to get back to recording time with the Uber experience because it's packed. We had the Pro-Am. I know. The Pro-Am was today.
Been
David
waiting
Tepper.
on you.
I know. David Tepper, Mac Brown, Roy Williams, all playing golf in the same group. So I feel like, so here's my question. I have this bucket hat that I love. Should I have Golf Walker meet Locked On Hornets Walker and just go ahead and try to combine forces?
I'd like to meet any Walker. I would have loved to meet Walker, like an hour ago, but you're big timing me on the golf course. I'm sitting here waiting around. I'm excited to talk about Dillon Brooks and Steve Clifford. And
no, you're not.
Just throwing
not
on
Dillon.
the golf. You're throwing on. Yeah, I am. And you're throwing on the golf hats and big time me talking about David Tepper. Anyway, all right.
That's right. Yes, hold on. Make sure I got my golf etiquette. Yes, golf clap that I got here. Big shout to Phyllis, who really helped me out in the Uber hellhole that was trying to sit there and waiting for. Yes, I'm not exaggerating. I waited for 38 minutes for my Uber. That's what it said. And you know what? Probably even a little bit longer. I waited for it.
Yeah, Uber long time.
Yeah.
And let me say something about the hat too. The hat that you're wearing, which you really have to go to YouTube to see this hat. It's a ridiculous hat. And I don't think
look good in it.
You say golf hat. I don't think the Quail Hollow would allow that hat on the golf course. That's got to be against their etiquette, their dress code. That is not.
You think I should reverse it? Is that the problem? Here, we can try that as well. No, you're right. We can reverse
the problem.
No, I think you're right. The more I think about it, I think it needs to be the black version, and I think that's what it'll be. All right, no, you're right. This is Quail Hollow-esque. My bad. You're so right. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Dillon Brooks because, Doug, everybody was laughing at the phrasing of the report from Shams Charania, of The Athletic, who reported that the Grizzlies would not bring back Dillon Brooks, quote, under any circumstance. And that phrasing, it was trending on Twitter because it was so egregious. And to be honest, look, it's a problem that the Grizzlies would leak that, right?
We don't know. Do we know for sure that they leaked that? We don't know that.
Well, I would
reckless speculation on this show.
Well, we love it. Yes, we used to have the reckless speculation soundbite. I don't know if that benefits Dillon to release. Yeah, let's say the Grizzlies don't want me back under any circumstance. And then everybody is championing it, though. I mean, the people that respond to that report, they're all with it because nobody was here for Dillon Brooks talking trash and then backing down and then saying the media is the one who created this monster that everyone perceives Dillon Brooks to be. So he's not going back to Memphis per report. What do you think about Charlotte potentially going after Dillon Brooks there, Doug Branson?
I think that Charlotte needs defenders, but they don't need defenders this badly, right? Because the goal for the Hornets should be to put together a roster that can compete in the playoffs. And I think Dillon Brooks was part of the reason the Grizzlies ultimately are no longer playing in the playoffs. And it's not just the words that he had that seemed to enrage LeBron James. It's also his shooting, his offense. We talk about all the time, these guys that play on one side of the floor. The Hornets have a lot of guys that play well on the offensive end of the floor, and they can't play defense to save their lives. And for Dillon Brooks, it's the exact opposite. I think there are other options out there to get lockdown defenders that aren't such a liability on the offensive end. and you don't have to deal with some of these intangible things. Like, I would rather see them bring in, someone with a little bit more playoff experience, veteran savvy, that understands like there's certain things you do and you don't do in the playoffs. And I don't think Dillon Brooks is that guy.
Well, I mean, Doug, offensively, it is so bad. You mentioned the points per shot attempt, but it can't be, and I mean every single year, the point per shot attempt is in the lower percentile, among the lowest percentiles of any player at the wing position, but also the usage percentage is among the higher percentiles. In fact, it went down this year compared to what it was the 3 previous seasons, and it was still in the 78th percentile. So the other thing is, it's not like, okay, if we just take the basketball out of his hands a lot more, and just have him be a spot-up shooter, then he'll play a lot better. Well, no, because the three-point shot doesn't fall at a high enough rate. So even if we take the basketball out of his hands and then just have him be out there on the three-point line, let's say LaMelo penetrates, kicks out, Dillon Brooks out there for 3, he's not a good enough three-point shooter. Defensively, yes, he's a good defender. And I know everybody's going to hate on him for the LeBron comments. I didn't love him either. I love being competitive. I like the agitator, right? But like, even a Pat Beverly who gets on a lot of people's nerves, at least it comes from what seems like a genuine place. And it does seem like he has an impact on the floor in a way where he might get in your head, right? Dillon Brooks, he's just out here being dirty.
Nobody's buying it. Nobody's buying it. That's right. The problem.
So look, he's not going to go to China. I mean, that's going way too far, which everybody's talking about how he's going to be out of the league. That's not going to happen. Somebody's going to pick him up. But as a Hornets fan, no, I don't want to go after Dillon Brooks and pay whatever he's looking for, to be honest with you.
Well, let's talk about what he's looking for, because Ramona Shelburne of ESPN reports that, maybe part of the reason why they didn't want to bring him back under any circumstances is because he wanted somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million per year. Okay. That'd be more than, that's more than PJ Washington is demanding. And I think that, that would be ridiculous. The Hornets are certainly, I mean, Mitch Kupchak's already said they're not big game hunting. So $25 million for Dillon Brooks, I would qualify that as big game hunting. So that price, if the Hornets were to entertain this at all, that price has got to get a lot more reasonable. But in a season that you're already going to be dealing with a little bit of backlash, if you decide to bring back Miles Bridges, you're going to be dealing with a little PR issue. I just think contextually, I just don't see the Hornets making waves in that way, bringing on Dillon Brooks and whatever attention that brings. But who knows? I mean, the Hornets, if the price comes down and they're desperate enough for defense, I'm not going to put it out of the realm of possibility. They may take this, if the price comes significantly down because other teams aren't interested in pursuing that, then it becomes a point where a smaller market team might have an advantage, to take a chance on a guy like that. So I'm not going to put it out of the realm of possibility, but I don't necessarily think it would be the smartest move.
No, I agree. I don't think it'd be the smartest move. And especially, the defense did improve this past season. And a big part of that is because of the head coach. Let's talk about it more. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We've been doing player recaps. Let's now do a coach recap. Steve Clifford. By the way, we have a report from Jake Fisher within the last few days, if I'm not mistaken. Don't know the exact timestamp on it.
But we will get
got a fishing hat. Let's go. Got the lure in there. There you go. Got a big one. I did it for you because there you go. We needed to hear it from you. All right. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about, I still love, we got a big one. I don't know why. It gets to me. It's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage tab and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or you get your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. And when you shop on eBay Motors, and with over 122 million parts to choose from on eBay Motors, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, the right prices, all on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Let's talk about Steve Clifford coming up next.
This is Locked On Hornets.
Now that we have this question, I feel like I need to ask this. Are y'all sweet potato pie folks or you pumpkin pie folks?
Pumpkin pie folks.
Sweet potato folk.
Pumpkin pie.
Sweet potato.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Doug, I think you're right. The black wasn't working. I do think this is the better Quail Hollow equipped bucket hat, so I reversed it back. I think you are right about that. Now I'll be welcomed again. Thank you. We welcome you for listening to Locked On Hornets. Dillon Brooks, not necessarily our favorite to bring here, and even if he helps defensively, as we were mentioning, Doug, this is a team that did get better defensively, especially post-All-Star break. Not only were they better defensively overall, defensive rating, I believe they finished third. They were first in the NBA heading into that Oklahoma City game, but they were still number one in transition defense, which if you are a Hornets sicko yourself, okay, then that means that it is literally the biggest change you can make. They were the worst transition defense. Under James Borrego, it was a constant problem. And then they got all the way towards the top. The fact that the Hornets were playing that well, they were getting back on D. It was an identity change thanks to guys like Dennis Smith Jr., Mark Williams, other defenders, PJ Washington, of course, helping out, but also Steve Clifford, Doug. Like, that is the identity. That is the thing in which Steve Clifford is known for. And this is the report I was talking about. So this was actually dropped. Okay, so it was a while back. This was actually earlier in the month, not necessarily within the last week. This was in April. And Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports said, quote, "The organization's present leadership structure has no intention of making a change when it comes to their head coach. However, Jake Fisher did caution that there does, quote, remain the potential for a new ownership structure to oversee staffing changes, and Clifford's short-term contract would present little obstacle for fresh Hornets leadership to pick a new play caller of its choosing." The direct quote from Jake Fisher there. So look, this is the thing we've talked about. Nothing new. It's just we do know that if the current ownership is in place, Steve Clifford, we expect back next season. Overall, what did you make in his first year back with the Hornets?
I thought he did a fantastic job considering all of the obstacles that he had to overcome, not just the injuries. Those were certainly, to hold this team together through those injuries, though, you really can't understate that, because I think a lot of other teams would have really buckled under that pressure and lost even more games and really, I think, not developed at all. Because it's not even about the number of wins or losses, really. I mean, you're talking about probably 5 to 10 games here or there that they would have been worse with maybe another coach. But did certain guys get better from game 1 to game 82? And in seasons that are true disasters, that doesn't tend to happen. But you did see moments when this team did start to put a little bit of the defense together. The problem, of course, is they couldn't put the offense and the defense together at the same time. And that's where you really factor in the injuries. What could he have done, if they did have all of those bodies available all year long? But Clifford needed to prove that this team could play defense, because they really couldn't under the former coach and James Borrego. So part of the reason why you bring Steve Clifford on is because he's a guy that is known for coming in and getting young teams to play better defense, to be more accountable, to play better as a team. And there was a stretch there, that crossed over the All-Star break where the Hornets were one of the better defensive teams in the league, and it equated to wins. That's when they had their 5-game winning streak, and they added 2 more against Detroit and New York. And so, I think he did an admirable job, and I think he's going to be a good shepherd for this team, and I'm glad that they've decided to stick with him. I think that's the right move, providing consistency in coaching to LaMelo Ball. Clifford did a great job of coming in and establishing good relationships with a lot of players, but most importantly, LaMelo Ball seems to really respect the research that Steve Clifford does on your game and the way he treats players. His philosophy with players are, look, these guys, I have to assume they're professionals, that they make a lot more money than I do. And so there's a certain way that you have to talk to these guys in order to get them to do the things that, as a coach are the right things for them to do, but you have to convince them. And the way you do that is with evidence, and you show them tape and you convince them that, hey, if you do it this way, then good things will happen. And so I think he took that approach with a lot of these players, and they really responded to it. So many players this season, Walker, said after games that they lost horribly, they would say, Coach gave us a good game plan. Yeah. We messed it up. Okay? That, to me, that's a sign, hey, Coach is doing something right.
Well, and you can see, look, this is an extreme example. This is at the peak of emotion of a devastating loss when Giannis says that we didn't make any adjustments, and that falls on the coach. So right. Maybe that kind of emotion would draw something bigger out from a Hornets player. Okay. I acknowledge that. Maybe this is a stretch. At the same time, players, if it gets bad enough, don't have any problem saying we didn't make any adjustments, and that sort of being a mask, not very good camouflage and criticizing the coach. And you never heard that from any Charlotte Hornet player this year. You didn't hear that from Terry Rozier. You didn't hear from Kelly Oubre. And to give both of those guys credit, they would always come in and say, yeah, we just didn't carry it out the way we were supposed to. We didn't execute it the way that we were supposed to. Another thing I'll say about Steve Clifford, Doug, he carried the reputation of not playing young players. The classic joke is that he won't play Victor Wembanyama once they draft him number 1 overall. While it being funny, I don't know if it's factual. We got to see everybody get an opportunity this year. It's not. We got to see everyone get an opportunity. Clifford reminded you of that. Book Knight did at the beginning of the season. Injuries were the cause of him getting another one at the end of the season, but Book Knight got some run. Kai Jones got run. Every single player on the team. Yes, injuries were a factor. But also, as I've mentioned a million times, Book Knight was going to get that no matter what. JT Thor got some time. Nick Richards, as we were just mentioning, he was out there at the very beginning of the season playing well against the Spurs, playing well against, in the third game, I forget who the opponent was. But then, Doug, even if you wanted to hold him accountable for not playing Mark Williams enough, well, okay, he hits the ground running right after Christmas and plays well. And so you can decide whether, this was evidence that he should have been playing earlier, or this is evidence that this was the right timeline for him. Whatever you want to view that as, wherever you want to fall, at the end of the day, Steve Clifford gave everybody an opportunity. They honestly had more wins than I expected. At the very beginning of the season, right, when everything was going so horribly wrong, we get a couple months in. If you were to tell me they're actually going to end up 27 wins, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's actually more than I probably would have accounted for. Or I thought they would be more Tank City, and they have the 4th best odds. So all in all, yeah, I do think people really gravitated towards building good relationships with Steve Clifford, which this year, really all you can ask for.
Yeah, we have to give shouts to Steve Clifford because he became the all-time franchise leader in coaching wins at 223. He passed our guy Alan Bristow for that award. So, I think you and I both agree that he's solidly in second place in our coaching rankings to the great Paul Silas. And then maybe Dave Cowan's under him. And maybe you could quibble. Maybe you go Dave Cowan's because, he did lead some of those better Hornets teams. But I think Clifford's longevity, I think you just have to give it to Clifford because he's long suffering. Because this team has really not given him the level of talent that's necessary that should complement what I think is Clifford's greatest strength, and that is his experience with playoff teams. He understands what wins in the playoffs, and just coming from the Thibodeau, Van Gundy tree, like he just understands, I think what wins playoff series, and he hasn't really had the talent and the circumstance necessary to achieve that goal. And if there's a real tragedy of this season, I think it's that he didn't really get the opportunity to he had to come into the job late, and then he didn't really get a good enough opportunity to help the squad understand fully, what it takes to play in meaningful games. And they didn't get an opportunity to avenge those play-in blowouts. But what should excite you is that on the other side of that, it gets darkest before the dawn. On the other side of that, Beautiful. If they do stay healthy and they get a big time draft pick, then buckle in, hold on to your seats, bucket hat.
Last thing I want to say about Steve Clifford too. One, it doesn't count for wins in the box score, good stats, yada yada. It doesn't count for any of that. Awesome dude, I do think it counts for player relationships, which were clearly strong this past season. But he's an awesome guy, and I do want him to have success in the playoffs because it's what he wants badly. It's what he wants more than anything. I don't know how different that is from any other coach. I can just tell you what I heard from him at the coaches' luncheon before the season started, and all hell broke loose because it wasn't long after the coaches' luncheon where Miles Bridges was arrested, where James Bouknight also had the legal issues, where LaMelo Ball eventually only plays 36 games due to injury. Gordon Hayward actually hits the high mark and gets 50 games under his belt, and that's the high mark. You know, after all hell broke loose, it was all after Steve Clifford said, I want to get to the postseason. All coaches are going to be measured by their playoff success, and he understands it. And I do think you're right, Doug. It's funny, when you were saying his biggest strength, you said exactly what I was thinking. He does create an awesome game plan for a playoff series. We saw it the only time that they got there when he was here, and we saw it really, as funny as it is, as
purple shirt guy.
I know. And honestly, remember Orlando found a way to beat Toronto in game 1 when the Raptors would eventually win the championship. DJ Augustine, baby, you sickos, you sicko brigade members out there. DJ Augustine hit the game winner, and Steve Clifford,
Larry Brown.
Oh, Brooke Lopez, that kills me.
Can I say one more thing? Because we've got this Howard Beck interview coming up, and a lot of this has to do with that Howard Beck interview, which is that this whole idea of Steve Clifford knowing what it takes to win in the playoffs. But I wanted to know from somebody who has covered a lot of playoff teams what he thinks that means, and so you're going to hear that coming up in just a second. But if there is a just and loving set of basketball gods, then the Hornets will get Wembanyama so that Steve Clifford can coach a generational talent. He's assistant coached Tracy McGrady. He's assistant coached Dwight Howard, prime Dwight Howard, and Lakers Dwight Howard as well, and Kobe. He's been around Kevin Durant in Brooklyn, and Kevin Durant loves him. Stars love this guy, and he deserves not only LaMelo Ball, but he deserves Wembanyama. And so for that reason, I believe that it's probably going to go to Ime Udoka and Houston Rockets. There are no basketball gods.
There are none. But Howard Beck is pretty good. Basketball god of a writer, if you will. And he joined us coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
There's a conversation that Doug Branson had with the legend, Howard Beck. You've heard him on the Low Post podcast. You've read his work. He's been covering the NBA for a long time, covered those Lakers teams, the Shaq and Kobe. Really was awesome doing that. I mean, he's been everywhere. I'm sure if the name kind of rings a bell, go look him up. I'm sure you've heard his voice before, and you're about to see him in just a moment right here on the Locked On Hornets podcast, so stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp, it's so easy to get caught up in what everyone needs from you. You never really take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. But therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then switch therapist anytime for no additional charge if that's what you choose to do. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. Again, that's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Howard Beck coming up next.
This is Locked On Hornets.
To start this off, we all know about LeBron and how he built a school and it got a lot of fanfare. By the time 2019 closes, Bismack Biyombo is planning to have 6 schools.
Take that, LeBron.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Happy to be joined by the great Howard Beck. Going to talk some ownership talk, but first, Howard, I want to talk about the NBA playoffs. You're very familiar with that. You've covered it for a long time. The Hornets, and maybe Hornets fans, are not so familiar with playoff basketball because the franchise has not won a playoff series in exactly 21 years, almost to the date. The amount of time that the Hornets have not won a playoff series is legally allowed to drink in the United States. So they do have a few reasons to hope, though. They've got LaMelo Ball, possibly a top pick in this coming NBA draft. And they've got a coach in Steve Clifford who seems like he has an understanding of how to build in the regular season for the type of game that wins in the playoffs. And he harps on that a lot. So I want to ask you, as someone who's covered this extensively and have talked to a lot of the major players, what makes the NBA playoffs a different kind of game than the regular season? And beyond having a lot of talent, I mean, that's obviously going to win you playoff series. But beyond that, what sets teams apart that can win playoff series versus teams that are just happy to be invited to the party?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Doug. Condolences to all the Hornets fans who have been waiting a very, very long time for a breakthrough. Since I'm based in New York and I'm seeing like the absolute exhilaration and joy among Knicks fans who are finally back. And of course they were in a couple of years ago too, but they hadn't won a playoff series in 10 years. So I know well through my surroundings and friends the emotional toll that the drought has. I also have Northern California roots, and obviously the Kings finally had their breakthrough after a very, very long drought. So the funny thing about the Hornets drought, of course, not funny, not really humorous funny, but it's actually part Hornets, part Bobcats, part other Hornets who are now Pelicans that are involved in this long drought. Right. So it's a very confusing drought, which somewhat speaks to the state of NBA basketball in Charlotte over the last couple of decades. But anyway, let's hope that they find their way through. Who knows? Maybe a Victor Wembanyama lands in their lap in a couple of months, and we're having a much different discussion this summer. It's a funny thing about the playoffs being quote unquote different, right? They obviously are. And Steve Clifford, as a veteran coach, knows that well. When you drill down and you try to get people to explain the why, it gets really interesting because it's this kind of, even in this era of advanced stats and all this extra data and all the study that's been done, I think people in the game struggle with how to explain it. Well, the game slows down. Well, why does it slow down? Right. And I'm not sure if that's really the truth anymore, but I'd have to look up the pace stats to see if that still holds, but that's the belief. I think there's a couple of things that are just very, I don't want to say obvious, but I mean, they should be readily apparent, right? One, you've gotten rid of all the really bad teams, right? So you might have been a great regular season team that doesn't hold up in the postseason. We've seen that happen before because sometimes you're a team that's built to, beat all the bad teams and beat the good teams just enough, right? The truly great teams are the teams that have that, undefinable combination of high-end talent, a certain kind of chemistry, and a cohesion. And it's a hard thing to put a definition on. The playoffs are different. So there's that part of it. The playoffs are different because you are only playing other good teams, good to great teams. Then there's the fact that because defense has been kind of determinative in champions, you can start going back from finals to Western Conference or to the conference final rounds, to the semifinal rounds, and it'll maybe be a little bit less with each round that you're moving backwards, but defense matters more. And so part of what happens, whether it's the game slowing down, whether it's just harder to score in the postseason, you are almost by definition facing much better defensive teams. You've gotten rid of all the really crappy ones. And so there's that aspect. And then on a very just basic human level, the stakes are higher. And so everything feels more important. And so every possession has this added urgency. The buildings themselves, come alive in a different way because the fans are involved in a different level. And these are things that we still can't quantify, no matter how many cameras are in the rafters, no matter how many things that synergy or second spectrum and all this stuff that we try to measure and quantify. You can't quantify the human element of this matters more now. I feel differently when I go out on the court. The fans sound different, and it is lending a different aspect to every possession. And so, that may just be an intensity level on the positive side. It may be an anxiety level on the negative side. And look no further than the Cleveland Cavaliers. absolutely folding in the first round. And all credit due to the Knicks for having, caused them to wilt on some level. But some of that seemed to me just to be young players who are caught in the glare and just didn't know what to do in that moment. Darius Garland and Evan Mobley are much better players than they showed in that series. And it wasn't entirely just the Knicks shutting them down. They just missed shots and did not seem up for the moment. They're young. That intensity level can have different effects on guys. So that's my best attempt to kind of off the top of my head describe something that I feel like is still kind of undefinable.
Yeah, no, I think it was a great description. I think that the anxiety of playing with those kind of stakes manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it can, especially with young teams, it can manifest itself, in maybe calling a team old or calling a superstar, old. So
saying things you shouldn't say. Listen,
yeah.
I'll even add this before I forget. It even affects us, the media. There was a younger reporter who I ran into along the way within the last couple of weeks who mentioned to me, I know that covering these games is the same as all the other games I've covered, but this feels different. I said, yeah, it is. It is. And like, I've been doing this for 26 years and I walk into an arena for a playoff game, and especially for the finals, I have no emotional investment. I don't care about the outcome. I get these weird kind of butterflies myself. And part of it is my own kind of, hey, I want to write a really great story about this, especially on the night that the championship is going to be decided. If you know going in that that's the night it may happen, I do find I put more of a pressure on myself, even as a writer, to capture the moment.
Yeah.
And so it is impossible to walk into these buildings in the playoffs and not feel it. It is a different energy.
Awesome stuff from Howard Beck. Really appreciate it. He's actually going to be on with the next episode too. Doug Branson, he's got him locked in his closet, just like Rafael Barlow. He's holding him hostage. So we get one more segment to go with Howard Beck. That's going to be tomorrow though. So stop it. Get out of here. But then come back for one more segment tomorrow. Great stuff. We appreciate you for joining us, making us your first listen. Make your second listen game to game NBA. As always, every moment, every top performance, every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Player recap for Nick Richards. Howard Beck going to be talking about his latest article on the Bucks sale. That'll be tomorrow. Until then, have a great rest of the day.